In this video, we're going to talk about classification of fungi. And there are 5 groups of fungi: the chytrids, which are the most primitive ones, they're aquatic. And then we have the zygomycetes, the glomeromycetes, and these 2 phyla are the major ones, the ones that are most diverse with highest number of species, the ascomycetes. And the one probably that's most familiar to you is the basidiomycetes, which are the fungi who produce mushrooms. Let's talk about each of these 5 groups. So chytrids, as I mentioned, is the most primitive group of fungi. And remember that when I say primitive, I mean that it has evolved a longer time ago. It's aquatic. Because it's aquatic, the spores that they produce are flagellated. We call these spores zoospores. It's a general term for any spore that is flagellated. So a lot of aquatic species of protists would produce those spores too. One thing I want you guys to pay attention as we talk about these different phyla of fungi is the way they reproduce. What type of spores they produce, what structure produces those spores, and this is going to help you identify fungi to the level of phylum. Okay, so all these groups are to the level of phylum. One thing that you're going to hear a lot about chytrids, if you haven't yet, is the fact that a lot of them cause diseases of animals. They have been particularly important in the decimation, really, of big populations of amphibians worldwide. Some species have already gone extinct because of chytrid infection, and it's pretty much everywhere in the world. Lots of amphibians are getting these chytrid infections, and a lot of them are dying. So they are certainly responsible in large part to the decline in amphibian population that we are having right now. The next phylum is the phylum Zygomycota. One big characteristic of this phylum that differentiates it from all the other ones is that they have sinusitic hypha. Remember, it's a hypha that has no septa separating the nuclei or separating cells. It's all a big multinucleated hypha. They can reproduce both sexually and asexually. And they have a type of sexual reproduction called conjugation. Remember we saw conjugation in bacteria? When 2 bacteria would come in close contact and a tube would form between them. Well, that's a similar idea. 2 different mating strains of zygomycetes would come physically in contact, and then they would form a little tube between them. So if you look at this diagram here on the right, imagine in gray, here is one mating strain, and in kind of tan color is another mating strain. If you look at their hyphae, let's start with the bottom here. Imagine their hyphae is not reproductive yet, they're growing, and then they come in close contact. Once they sense the presence of each other, they start growing these outgrowths towards each other. These outgrowths are the only part of the body that is eventually going to form a septum. It's not showing here, but it will form a septum, and this will be separated from the rest. And each of these parts will become like a gamete. So that's the gametes for fungi. When they meet, they are going to fuse, right, and form what we call a zygosporangium. That's going to form this kind of tough wall, and eventually is going to sprout into a sporangium, which is a structure that produces spores, right? And then the spores, meiosis is going to happen in here. So remember, this is diploid, right? And then meiosis is going to happen in here and produce spores. These spores are going to land somewhere and then grow. So this is what we see here in the bottom is sexual reproduction in Zygomycota. But they can also reproduce asexually very easily, and how they do that is being represented by just this kind of cycle arrow right here in each of these fungi. So they can simply produce this kind of upright stalks, which are the sporangiophores, and at the tip of the sporangiophores, they're going to produce sporangia. They're globe-shaped. You can see on this picture on the left here, there's the sporangium of Zygomycota, but an asexual sporangium. And inside of the sporangium, these spores are going to be produced by mitosis. They are asexual spores. So these spores are clones of this one mycelium here. It's going to land somewhere and produce an identical fungus. Whereas these spores right here that were produced by meiosis, they're sexual spores, they're diverse. And they're going to land somewhere and they're going to grow into a mycelium that is different from both parents. The third group of fungi is the group that belongs to the phylum Glomeromycota, or we call them the glomeromycetes. And this will include most of the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizae is an extremely important symbiotic relationship between fungi and vascular plants. We talked about this when we talk about evolution, of terrestrial organisms. Remember that the first terrestrial organisms, truly terrestrial organisms, were plants in association with fungi, and that association was via mycorrhizae. If you look here on the left-hand side, imagine like if you would uproot a plant and you wash that root, and you're looking at the very tip of the root right here, and on the left-hand side of this picture is showing the root by itself, if it were not infected by the fungus, and on the right-hand side is the root with the fungus. And when I say infected, it means that it has the fungus. It doesn't mean that this fungus is pathological. It's not going to cause a disease. On the contrary, this fungus is going to help the plant grow better. And the way it helps, if you pay attention, is by increasing the surface area of that root. And by increasing the surface area of the root is going to allow the root to absorb more water and more nutrients than if that root did not have an association with the mycorrhiza. If you kind of blow this up, it would look something like this. So this is the fungus on the outside, right? And these are the cells of the plant, of the root of the plant. Notice that the fungus has its hypha inserted in the cells of the plant. So it's able to just move nutrients and move water into the plant. And then the plant just brings it to its vascular system and takes it everywhere. In exchange, that fungus receives carbohydrates, right? Photosynthetic products. The next phylum is the phylum Ascomycota, or we call them in general ascomycetes, and they're known as sac fungi, also known as cup fungi. Cup because the fruiting body of a lot of them looks like this little cup, but not all of them have that. So for example, truffles are also in this group. This is probably the most expensive fungus that you're going to find. It's a delicacy. Gourmet restaurants would, charge a lot of money for food with truffles. They're delicious. Yeasts are also in this group, the yeast that we use for baking. Powdery mildew, and you have these little cup fungi. What characterizes these guys? Their hyphae are septate, so it can be monokaryotic, but they also will have a dikaryotic stage, remember, in sexual reproduction. They can reproduce asexually, they produce conidia, and then yeast can perform budding, as we talked about before. They will commonly reproduce sexually, and when they reproduce sexually, they are going to form these fruiting bodies. And if you look here, imagine this is one mating type here, like producing this hypha, and this is another mating type producing this hypha right here. When they merge, they're going to go through plasmogamy and then produce this fruiting body, right, which is N plus N. Remember, it's dikaryotic. This fruiting body is going to produce little cells here at the tip, which are the sporangia, and in these cells, fertilization will occur. The zygote is going to undergo meiosis immediately, and it's going to form spores. And these cells right here are going to have this shape, okay, the shape of a sac, and that's why they're also called sac fungi. And then inside, they usually have 8 spores in that sac. Okay, so the 4 created by meiosis, and then each of them will undergo mitosis, and you're going to have like 8 spores in each of those sacs. These sacs here that you're seeing, they're called asci, which is the plural, or ascus, which will be the singular, and that's why the name Ascomycota or ascomycete. And then finally, the last phylum is the phylum that is most familiar to you, because the phylum that involves mushrooms, the stinkhorn fungi, toadstools, puffballs, bracket fungi. So these are more commonly seen. This phylum is called the basidiomycota or the basidiomycetes. And of course, they produce basidiospores. These basidiospores are produced, so these are here basidiospores at the tip of the structure, and they're producing this structure called the basidium, which is this club-shaped structure. That's why the name Basidiomycota. These structures are found in the gills of the mushrooms. So if under the cap of a mushroom, if you look at the gills, which are those kind of brown lines, you can see if you put it under the microscope, you would be able to see these basidia with the basidiospores. They do have septate hyphae, like the ascomycota, so they have the monokaryotic and the dikaryotic stage. That's the fungus sexual reproduction that I showed you in a previous slide. The whole mushroom is dikaryotic, except for the basidium, in which fertilization will occur, the zygote will form and will undergo meiosis and form these 4 basidiospores at the tip. Asexual reproduction is not frequent in this group, so we don't really know much about how it reproduces asexually. They mostly reproduce sexually. So just to summarize how to differentiate among these 5 groups of fungi. Chytrids are aquatic. Their spores are flagellated. We call them zoospores. Zygomycota produce zygospores, and they are cenocytic. They have no septa in their hypha. Glomeromycota, they are the mycorrhizae. Ascomycota, they produce asci, so their sporangia in sexual reproduction is called an ascus, and these sporangia will produce ascospores. Their hyphae are septate, as well as the hyphae of basidiomycota, which are also septate. Their spore-producing structures, their sporangia, they are club-shaped, and they're called basidia, and this basidia is going to produce basidiospores.